Summer squash can be one of the most rewarding things you grow in the garden. They're super prolific, they're quick to mature, and they're really delicious. But if you're not careful, your hopes and dreams of growing the perfect zucchini can be quickly replaced with nightmares of pest infestation and diseases of biblical proportions. So today I want to share with you all the tips and tricks I've learned, most of which I've learned the hard way, to help you grow beautiful summer squash all season long. We're going to talk about everything from seed to harvest. This is an ultimate summer squash growing guide that's going to help you grow perfect, beautiful zucchinis. So let's dive into it. So let's talk about what summer squash is. There are two types of squash. There are your winter squash and your summer squash. Your winter squash are going to be things like pumpkins and butternut squash. Those are going to take a really long time to mature, and the way you grow them is similar, except for the fact that they take a really long time to mature. But for simplicity, we're going to keep this video about summer squash. Now, your summer squash are going to be your quick growing squash. That's going to be your yellow summer squash. That's going to be zucchinis. Things like the scallop, green, and white binning squash. I really love those. They're super cute. But those are going to be your summer squash varieties. And the way that we care for those and the way that we take care of those, it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, but there are a lot of things to keep in mind, especially when it comes to bugs and disease, which we're going to dive into. But the very first thing to note when it comes to growing your summer squash, whether it's zucchini, yellow squash, or your scallop binnings or something else, is how we plant them. They mature so quickly and they are so easy to germinate. It's probably your best option to just direct seed them in your beds. You're going to want to give your squash about 2 to 3 feet per plant. To be honest with you, 3 feet is usually best. You have two different types, and that's going to be your bush varieties and your vining varieties. Both are going to get rather large throughout the season. But your vining varieties are going to produce a stem that kind of creeps along the ground, whereas your bush varieties are a little bit more compact. In cases of bush varieties, a lot of people will plant them about that 2 to 2.5 feet apart. Your vining varieties, you definitely want to do at least 3 feet apart. Either way, whether it's a bush variety or whether it's a vining variety, you can find this information on the seed packet. But whichever variety it is, you're going to plant them the same way. Squash seeds are fairly big seeds. And because they're fairly big seeds, we are going to want to plant them pretty deep in the soil. They're going to germinate pretty quickly, usually within a week. If temperatures are right, it's pretty warm outside, the soil is pretty moist, you might even get germination in a couple of days. Your summer squash are going to like well-draining soil that's rich in organic matter. Like most of your vegetables throughout the growing season, they like consistent water. They don't want to stay wet, but they also don't want to dry out. And for good fruit production, you're going to want to keep that watering schedule consistent. I've talked about this in other videos. And once your seeds germinate, you're going to notice that they shoot up really fast. These are plants that will grow large really quickly. That time right after they germinate, before they get established and before they have several leaves, they're really vulnerable to pests. And this is an important time to make sure that you're taking care of your little seedlings, that you're keeping them protected. The way that I like to do this is I actually like to cover them with a insect netting. I keep them covered actually until they begin to flower. You can buy a cheap netting off Amazon for a few dollars. I'll actually link the ones I bought here for you in the description if you find that helpful. But I like to keep them covered, and I like to keep them fertilized on a schedule of every 2 weeks once they get their first set of true leaves. I will use 1 ounce of AgroThrive for every gallon of water. This is about half the recommended strength. And I'll start them on this 2-week fertilizing schedule throughout the growing season. I'll kind of reduce once they get into fruit production. Sometimes I'll reduce to 4 weeks, sometimes I won't. It just kind of depends on what my plants look like, how healthy they are, and if we've dealt with any bug infestations. When it comes to your zucchinis and your other squash varieties, it's a really good idea to add mulch at the base of your plants. This kind of helps maintain that consistent moisture level. It will keep the soil covered. It will maintain the nutrients that are in that soil. And it's a really great way, like I said, to keep that moisture level consistent in the soil. When it comes to the type of mulch, you can use leaves, you can use pine shavings. This is my favorite way to mulch my garden, is small pine shavings. You could also use straw. Although I would be careful about that. I've talked about that in other videos, but I've gotten straw before that had been sprayed with some type of herbicide that killed a lot of my nightshade plants. And so I steer away from straw now. And it can also be full of weed seeds, so just something to keep in mind. You can even use grass clippings. Now, grass clippings can mat up and be really high in nitrogen, and they can actually become anaerobic, so be careful when you use that. Generally speaking, your summer squash, your zucchinis are going to be between 50 and 65 days from seed planting to harvest. This is really fast, and you're also going to get a lot of zucchini. If your plants are healthy, they can produce abundance. So you may only need a couple of plants and still wind up with zucchini that you're picking every single day. And I'm curious, what's your favorite type of summer squash? Leave me a comment down below and let me know. So let's talk about the issues we might run into when it comes to our summer squash. The biggest one for me is squash vine borers and squash bugs. I know that squash bugs and vine borers, they're gonna love my zucchini plants as much as I do. So because of that, there are some things we need to be aware of to deal with the squash bugs and vine borers. And really, to be honest with you, prevention is the best method of dealing with them. The squash bug is a bug it stinks. If you squish it, it will stink really bad. They're like a little hard-shelled bug, and they will lay eggs on the underside of your summer squash plants. The eggs will be kind of copper or brown in color, and you'll have like a whole grouping of them together. The best way, if you find these eggs, to deal with them is just to squish them. Rub them right off the plant, squish them between your fingers, and make sure you get them all off, because your garden can get really overrun with these squash bugs in a very short period of time. So a best practice that I found is just checking my plants often for the eggs. In the height of the growing season, I will actually go out every single day and check all of my squash plants and the underside of their leaves for squash bug eggs and get rid of them. If you see squash bugs, and you'll notice because they're big, ugly bugs on your zucchinis, they're usually around the base of the plant a lot of times. They will climb up the leaves and things, but they like to congregate around the base of the plant. One really good solution to dealing with your squash bugs is to spray a dish soap water solution on them. This will kill them, and I use this often. If I find that there are squash bugs on my plants, I am coating that thing down. I found that I will kill them and them jokers will be back in a couple of days. So this is something you're gonna really have to maintain keeping an eye on. If you see a couple of bugs, maybe there's not a lot of them, you can go out there and pick the bugs off by hand. I just drown them in a bucket of water. And a lot of times I'll have my watering can with me and I'll just put them directly in the watering can and let them drown. I do not pour that on my plants afterwards. I pour it out in a location that's far away from my garden, just in case any survive. The squash vine borer, on the other hand, is a little bit different. This comes from a type of moth. I believe it's a moth, but a type of moth that will actually land on your zucchini plant. It will lay a single egg. It looks similar to the squash bug egg, but it's going to be laid usually around the stem, the main stem of your squash plant. What happens with the squash vine borer, that egg hatches and produces this larvae, this really ugly looking little larvae, and it will burrow into the stem of your squash plant. And it will start to eat it from the inside out. And the way that you'll notice that you have a squash vine borer is the leaves will begin to wilt and die. You'll notice that your plant just looks pitiful. It doesn't look like it's growing well. And if you look at the base of the plant, a lot of times you'll see this like yellow stuff. It's like the inside of the plant is coming out, but there's also the larvae poop that's there and that yellow stuff. It looks nasty. And if you inspect it, you'll actually see a hole in the stem where that larvae climbed in. And the way that we can deal with this once we have a squash vine borer is there are a couple of different ways. There are things I've tried in the past and I've had some success. But to be honest with you, a lot of times my plants didn't survive. There's only been a handful of times I've been able to pull them back from having a squash vine borer. If you catch it early enough, you can use a BT solution. You can mix up some BT and follow the directions on how to mix that up. Use a syringe, like a needle, a syringe, and inject the stem. And if you're pretty confident on where that vine borer is, you might be able to kill it using that BT solution by injecting it with the syringe. But again, I've not had a lot of success with that. The other option is you can actually remove the squash vine borer. So if you look at the stem, you see the little yellow stuff coming out of it, looks really gross, and you find the hole, you can actually take a pair of scissors, preferably like your nail scissors, really small scissors, and a pair of tweezers. And you can gently cut open the stem and use the tweezers to extract the vine borer, kill that thing, get it out of your garden, and give your plant a boost of fertilizer, and it might come back to life if the damage isn't too severe. But if you want to avoid squash bugs and squash vine borers, one thing you could do is plant them a little bit later in the season. For most areas, the squash bug, squash vine borer threat begins to diminish in late July into August. Now, you're going to notice that you probably still have squash bugs and vine borers in July and maybe even into August, but this is when they begin to die off. This is the time that you want to plant your zucchini plants if you want to avoid them. The pest pressure is really going to go down toward the latter part of the year. Now, depending on where you live, you're going to need to be mindful of when your first frost date is. Like I said, your summer squash varieties, most of them are going to reach maturity between 50 to 65 days. You're going to want to plant varieties that are quick to mature, and you're probably going to want to plant a lot of them so you can get as much of a harvest before the cold sets in the fall. If you're like me and you live in a very mild climate like Florida, you might even be able to grow your zucchini for most of the year. Okay, so let's talk about pollination and how your summer squash actually become summer squash. You're going to have a female flower and a male flower. When your plants first get blooming, when you start seeing the first flowers, generally you're going to be seeing male flowers. You're going to know that they're a male flower because they're just a stem. It's a beautiful yellow flower, and behind it is just a stem. The female flowers, on the other hand, are going to have a small fruit behind them. The way that they normally get pollinated is by bees or other insects taking the pollen from the male flower and transferring it to the female flower. If we keep our plants covered, or if it's early in the season, there aren't a lot of bees, or if we just don't have a lot of pollinators in our garden for whatever reason, we can hand pollinate. And the way that we do this, a lot of people will use a Q-tip. This is a great way to do it. Probably the way that you should do it. You're going to notice here that I actually just take the flower off the plant. The reason why I do this is because there's one male flower, there's one female flower, and I know this male flower is going to die before the next female flower comes about. After a few days, that summer squash is going to begin to grow. You're going to want to pick your summer squash when they're young and tender. If you allow your zucchini, your summer squash, to keep growing, to keep maturing, they're going to get really big, they're not going to taste as well, and the seeds inside of them are going to begin to mature. The goal of the plant is actually to grow the fruit out, get the seeds to maturity so that the plant can continue its life. So what we do is we harvest our zucchini, our summer squash, when they're very young, they're very tender, they're small. This is going to encourage that plant to keep producing fruit. And the way that we're gonna wanna harvest our zucchini, our yellow squash, or even this round squash that I'm showing here, we're gonna hold the zucchini with one hand, we're gonna hold the plant with the other hand and twist it. This kind of helps prevent against too much damage being done to your plant by removing the zucchini. If you just pull it off, you're gonna probably pull that plant right out of the ground. You could also take some scissors or some snips and cut your zucchini off that way. When it comes to pest and disease, understanding that you're probably going to deal with some type of pest or some type of disease, it's usually not a matter of if, most of the time it's a matter of when. So to give us a little bit of insurance policy and to ensure that we grow the most zucchini and summer squash possible, a really good option is to succession sow. You could really plant them every few weeks. Now, they're going to take up a lot of space in the garden, so be mindful of the space that you have, but I would say plant as often as you can, just so that if pest or disease do take out some plants, which is probably going to happen, you have backups. One of the main diseases that your squash plants might deal with is something called powdery mildew. I did my first planting of summer squash in late January, early February in my front yard garden. And temperatures got a little cool and they got a little wet, and guess what? I'm dealing with powdery mildew. One of the ways we can try to prevent powdery mildew is with a baking soda water solution. You're gonna wanna use 1 tablespoon of baking soda for every gallon of water. And you can mix this up in a spray bottle, shake it up really good, spray it on the leaves of your plants. You can utilize a spraying schedule of once a week, once every 2 weeks, coat those leaves down really well. You're gonna wanna do this early in the morning or late in the evening. If it rains, it's gonna wash it off of your plants, so that's something to keep in mind. If you notice that you do have powdery mildew spots, they're gonna look like these little spots on the leaves. They almost kind of look fuzzy. And in that case, that's powdery mildew, most likely. If you only have 1 or 2 leaves that look like they have powdery mildew or the infestation has just begun, you can actually remove those leaves from your plant, dispose of them away from your garden, in the garbage or burn them or whatever, but dispose of them away from your garden. And this may be enough to really get rid of the infestation. You could then use your baking soda and water solution to help prevent the powdery mildew from getting on the other leaves. If the infestation has gotten kind of bad, or if you've been using the baking soda water solution and you don't have a lot of success, the next thing you could do is use neem oil. Now, neem oil is not something I go to start with. The reason why is neem oil can also kill off a lot of bugs, and beneficial bugs at that. So because of this, we want to use neem oil sparingly. Neem oil is safe for human consumption. It's safe for your pets to consume. It's not going to be something that's harmful for you. It's natural and it's organic. So kind of keeping that in mind. I'm going to use this about once a week until I notice that the powdery mildew infestation is gone. And then I'm going to switch back to my baking soda water solution. If you're trying everything and the powdery mildew is just not going away, rather than limping that plant along, this is why we would have that succession plan in place and we would have other plants already growing. It might be better to just divert your attention to your younger, healthier plants and get them going and growing and be able to harvest from those. It's important to plant your summer squash varieties at the right time. Summer squash like it pretty warm, but they can handle a little bit of cold. You're gonna wanna wait until all danger of frost has passed before you plant your summer squash seeds. So in summary, summer squash, like zucchini, is going to be great to grow in your garden. It's going to be prolific, quick to mature, and you can get a bumper crop harvest. You can put it in soups and stews, you can roast it, you can add it to bread. You really can sneak zucchini into almost everything. It's really good for you. It's really easy to grow as long as you keep in mind the things we discussed about pests, maintain really healthy soil, give it some fertilizer on occasion, keep that moisture level in the soil consistent, and you're gonna have a great time growing zucchini this year. Leave me some comments down below. Let me know what you thought of the video. Let me know what stood out to you, or maybe some other questions you might have, or things that you're doing in your garden when it comes to growing your summer squash. I'm gonna leave a video on the screen for you to check out until the next one comes out. Thank you guys again so much for watching. May your garden be filled with grace, and may you be abundantly blessed. We'll see you next time. Bye.